The physical city, what is it? It's basically public space. It is the space outside. It is the space where I can see you, I can talk to you, I can encounter a stranger, I can encounter the unexpected, the unknown. The physical city is a network of unlimited possibilities, of beginnings, connections, and endings. But the physical city in our context is also the 6-lane or 8-lane road that you had to cross just now, getting here. It is that concrete drain that you had to walk on, and the thick green hedge next to you as you walk along the drain. It is that building that you had to walk past, but you could not look inside. So think about it, the past 10 minutes. The past 10 minutes that you took walking here, from the bus stop or from the City Hall MRT station, and did those 10 minutes mean anything to you? Was it somewhat of a blank, nothing much, just something that you had to get through to get here, to your destination? Maybe the walk down Hill Street or Clemenceau Avenue didn't make much of a story. Certainly not something that you remember and 20 years from now you tell your grandchildren about that walk, you know, that Saturday I walked to this talk, you know, it's nothing. And if it is not worth sharing, if this walk is not worth telling your grandchildren about, I want to ask you why. Why is that? Why is the modern city we live in, the streets we walk on, not like these pretty streets that we see in our travels, where the destination is as beautiful as the journey. If you have a very nice museum to get to, you want to get there, but you don't mind. The 30-minute walk, 40-minute walk you take to get there is just so enjoyable as well. And why is it that the streets that we walk on are like this and like this? The lack of character, the lack of character of our pavements is, you can say it's due to, can be attributed to something called the setback rule. And today I'm going to say a little bit about this and a very simple solution on how to, remove these barriers between us. The setback rule is essentially a planning device that buffers buildings from streets and streets from buildings. The architects in the audience may know what I'm talking about. It is essentially, it imposes upon building designs this physical space that needs to be kept empty between the building form and the street. In addition, it makes sure that a 3-meter wide planting strip, right, has to be provided as a further buffer between the street and the building. So what this results, the result of all this is that we get, most of our developments are closed fortresses. These closed fortresses have their own boundary walls, their guard houses, right? And they have a 3-meter thick protective jacket of green planting. Well, I can give 3 reasons, okay, but before that, what this means to the pedestrian, right, the street that I was talking about just now, what this means to the pedestrian is that he is doubly ostracized. He is ostracized by the building, right, on one side, and he is also repelled by the fast-moving motor traffic on the other side. And I can give 3 reasons for this. One is that the open space is basically divested from the state into private hands. And this is a huge amount of land that basically the state gives up liability for, and the private developers, the private owners takes it on to maintain and to manage. 2, the persistent image, and you've heard this slogan of a garden city, a city within a garden, right? This kind of imagery can be created with these guidelines in place. When the building steps away from the street and the planting takes over as the kind of facade of our city. And 3, roads can be widened. And this we see all the time in our city. Roads can be widened without much impact to the rest of the city. And meaning that this guideline facilitates as a top priority automobile traffic. But it was not always like this. In the old city, there was no setback. In the old city, architecture did not always have to stand out, and buildings always had a public face. Buildings always contributed activity to the street. What we're essentially talking about is the building form abutting the property line, right? You have the building and you have the property line, and these two become one. And so what this means is that the facade is not just the external wall of a building, but it is also the internal wall of a street. It also helps to enclose and shape the public space of the street, right? And what we see here is simply shifting the red line, right? The building form does not change. It is all about taking away this void space between the boundary line and the building, and you either move the building to the property line or you move the property line to the building. So we did a study, we did a map, and we drew in these red lines, and basically we used the red lines to indicate the streets in our city that have no setbacks. Meaning the streets where the buildings come up to the property line to engage the pavement, engage the city. And this is what we found. And the red lines incidentally show the streets that we know the best. Orchard Road, Victoria Street, Little India, Geylang, Shenton Way, right? These are the streets without setbacks. These are the streets where the buildings engage the city. But this map also shows the staggering extent of the city, where the buildings withdraw and become isolated objects. And these areas are the areas where it is not so pleasant to walk. These are the areas where we alight from the bus and we hurry from the bus stop to our doorstep. These are the areas where we don't want to linger and it's not nice to walk in. And these make up those empty moments in our lives, the empty moments in our cities that we should regain and make more meaningful and more beautiful. So I want to use an analogy to compare two cities. And the first one is the traditional city of Barcelona. The map here shows Barcelona, the traditional part of Barcelona, and the black represents the built mass. The white represents the street space. And basically what you see is that the built form comes right up to define the street. And the white space is pretty much the negative of the built form. Where the built form isn't, there is the street. And what you get, some people call this the urban fabric. What you get is a very intense and a very interesting experience walking through the city. Anything can happen. There are so many possibilities. And if we think of it as a fabric and we look at the threads, and the threads that make up the fabric are all interwoven and they are continuous through the entire piece of cloth. And everything is very strongly held together. The second city is the city of Singapore. And if you just compare the figure ground, we call this a figure ground map, and you see the black forms. The black forms are basically the buildings, and you see how the buildings shy away from the street. They pull back from the street and become isolated objects, isolated and individualistic objects. And if we think of it as a fabric, it is still there, but the objects are now disparate objects with no relationship to one another, and they now take the foreground. They have become the foreground, and they now define the character of our city. And these are objects, not only separate objects, but they are the barriers between them are also reinforced by boundary walls and green buffers. And so I leave you with this image, and I ask you, do we have a garden or a city? And is it possible to have both, a garden city or a city within a garden? To me, I think it is possible, and I think to make a city, we need to regain the street. Regain the street, remove the setbacks, free up the space and give it to the pedestrians, put more activity on the street, and make make invigorating environments for the building to talk to the people and for the people to talk to one another, regain the street, and we enrich our lives. Thank you.